The storm rolled in from the Pacific, dark clouds gathering over Cedar Cove like harbingers of the confrontation to come. Avery stood at her aunt's kitchen window, watching whitecaps form on the normally placid bay. "They're saying it might knock out power," Marina commented, filling emergency lanterns with oil. "I'll bring in more firewood before it hits." Avery nodded absently, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, where the baby had been especially active all morning. "I'll finish the client proposal, but we still have internet." She just settled at her desk when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the small house. Marina called that she'd get it, and Avery returned her attention to her laptop, assuming it was a neighbor coming to borrow something before the storm. Then she heard his voice. "I need to see Avery." "Kai." "Here." The room tilted sickeningly around her. "I believe my niece deserves some warning before unexpected visitors arrive," Marina's cool reply carried down the hallway. "With all due respect, ma'am, I think the time for warnings has passed." His tone held an edge Avery had rarely heard, even during their worst arguments. Heart hammering, she rose and moved toward the front door. Marina stood like a sentinel, her small frame somehow blocking Kai's much larger one from entering. Beyond them, the sky had darkened ominously, wind whipping through the beach grasses. "It's okay, Marina," Avery said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll talk to him." Marina assessed her with concern, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll be in the greenhouse if you need me," she said, giving Kai a look that clearly communicated the consequences should he upset her niece. Then they were alone, face to face for the first time since signing their divorce papers. Kai looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His gaze dropped immediately to her belly, visible now even beneath her oversized sweater. "So it's true," he said quietly. Avery crossed her arms, a protective gesture. "How did you find out?" "Does it matter? You weren't planning to tell me, were you?" The accusation hung between them, justified but still painful. Outside, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, pattering against the windows. "Come in," she said finally. "We shouldn't do this in the doorway." He followed her to the living room, his presence filling the small space in a way that made her acutely aware of every breath, every movement. They stood awkwardly, neither willing to sit, as if this conversation required the readiness to flee. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Kai asked again, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Avery met his gaze directly. "I don't know." "You don't know?" Incredulity raised his volume. "That's my child, Avery. Mine too." "Is it?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "For the past year of our marriage, nothing was yours except your work. Not our home, not our plans, certainly not me." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" "When was the last time you were actually present, Kai? Really there, not just physically in the room while your mind was on some project or deadline?" Lightning flashed outside, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that seemed to emphasize her words. "I was building something for us," he argued, "for our future." "No," Avery shook her head, tears threatening despite her resolve to remain calm. "You were building something for yourself. I became an afterthought, a convenience. Someone to maintain the house and keep the fridge stocked and not complain when you missed another dinner or another weekend." Pain flashed across his features. "I never meant for that to happen." "But it did happen," Avery said, her voice breaking, "and when I tried to talk to you about it, you were too busy to listen." The memory surfaced with fresh anguish. The nights she'd fallen asleep alone, the conversations cut short by his buzzing phone, the growing silence between them that she'd filled with increasingly desperate attempts to reconnect. Kai ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar that it made her heart ache. "So this is what? Revenge? Keeping my child from me because I was a workaholic?" "This isn't about revenge," she said, her voice breaking. "This is about protection. I'm trying to protect myself from hoping you'll change, from building another life around someone who will always put me last. And yes, I'm trying to protect his baby from feeling the way I felt, like they're never quite important enough." The words landed like blows. Kai took a step back, his expression stricken. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. "I never knew you felt that way," he said finally. "You should have told me." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I did tell you, Kai, so many times in so many ways. You just weren't listening." Before he could respond, a tremendous crack sounded outside, followed by the distinctive splintering of wood. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the room into storm-shadowed dimness. "That sounded like it hit the roof," Avery said, momentarily distracted from their confrontation. Kai moved to the window, peering out into the gale. A branch came down on the corner of the house. It
Doesn't look too bad from here, but another crash, this time accompanied by the sound of breaking glass from somewhere toward the back of the house. The greenhouse, Avery gasped, already moving toward the door. Kai caught her arm. Stay here. I'll check. She's my aunt, Avery argued, pulling free. I'm going. They burst out into the storm together, rain immediately soaking them as they rounded the house to the small greenhouse attached to the back porch. The structure was partially collapsed, a large pine branch having sheared through its glass roof. Marina, Avery called, heart in her throat as they approached the damaged building. Her aunt's voice responded from inside, shaken but clear. I'm all right, but I'm trapped behind the workbench. Something's fallen against the door. Kai assessed the situation quickly. The frame's unstable. We need to be careful how we move things. He turned to Avery. Go back inside. Get towels and first aid supplies ready. I'll get her out. For once, Avery didn't argue. She retreated to the house, gathering supplies with trembling hands as she heard Kai working to clear a path to Marina. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the back door opened, bringing a gust of wind and rain along with Kai supporting Marina, whose forehead bore a nasty cut. It's not as bad as it looks, Marina insisted as Avery helped her to the couch. Head wounds always bleed dramatically. While Avery tended to her aunt, Kai moved efficiently through the house, finding candles and matches, checking windows for damage, and bringing in extra firewood from the covered porch. The road's already starting to flood, he reported, returning from a final check outside. Nobody's going anywhere until this passes. The implication hung in the rain-heavy air. They were trapped together, their unfinished conversation as turbulent as the storm surrounding them. Hours later, with Marina resting in her room and the worst of the storm beginning to subside, Avery and Kai sat on opposite ends of the couch, the fireplace, casting flickering shadows across their faces. The silence between them had shifted from hostile to something more contemplative. Thank you, Avery said finally, for helping with Marina and the greenhouse. Kai nodded, his profile sharp against the firelight. I'm sorry about barging in like that. I was angry. You had a right to be, she admitted softly. I should have told you about the baby. His gaze returned to her belly, a mix of wonder and uncertainty in his eyes. How is everything? Kai asked, with the pregnancy. The simple question, the first acknowledgement of their shared reality, cracked something open inside her. Good, she said, her voice catching. Healthy, it's a girl. A girl? He repeated, the words filled with a reverence that made Avery's chest tighten. Without conscious decision, she reached for his hand and placed it gently on her belly. For a moment nothing happened, then a distinct kick pressed against his palm. Kai's sharp intake of breath was audible even above the diminishing storm outside. His eyes met Avery's, filled with an emotion too complex to name. I don't know how to do this, he confessed, his voice raw. But I want to try. Please, Avery, let me try. In that moment, with his hand warm against her and their daughter moving between them, the full weight of what they'd lost, and what might still be saved, crashed over her like a wave. I'm scared, she whispered, a truth she hadn't admitted even to herself. I'm scared of believing in you again. I know, he said quietly. I'm scared too, terrified actually, but I think maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means we understand what's at stake this time. Outside, the wind had finally calmed, the rain reduced to a gentle patter against the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind damage that would need repair, but also a clearer sky than before.
Morning sickness was a misnomer, Avery decided, as she leaned against the cool tile of her bathroom wall at 2 in the afternoon. 4 months into her pregnancy, and nausea still ambushed her at the most inconvenient moments. Tea's ready, called Marina, her aunt's voice carrying through the small beach house they now shared in Cedar Cove, the coastal town where Avery had grown up. 3 hours from Seattle and the remnants of her former life. Marina appeared in the doorway, silver-streaked hair piled in a messy bun, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. At 62, she had the energy of someone decades younger and the wisdom of someone centuries older, at least according to Avery's current perspective. Ginger and honey, just like my mother used to make, Marina said, offering a steaming mug. Works wonders for the stomach. Avery accepted it gratefully. Did your mother also dispense advice on how to navigate unplanned pregnancies after divorce? She might have if divorce had been more common in her day, Marina replied with a gentle smile. But I think her advice would have been the same regardless. One breath at a time.
One breath at a time had become Avery's mantra since leaving Seattle. It carried her through setting up a makeshift graphic design studio in Marina's spare bedroom, through establishing herself with new clients who didn't know about her failed marriage, to the first prenatal appointment where she checked single on the intake form. The Hudson Gallery called again, Marina mentioned, settling onto the edge of the bathtub. They're very interested in your coastal series for their summer exhibition. Avery nodded, her free hand unconsciously drifting to her growing belly. The pregnancy had unexpectedly reinvigorated her creativity. The watercolor paintings she'd abandoned during the last tense year with Kai now flowed from her brushes with new urgency and depth. "I'll call them back today," she promised, "after my walk." The daily walk along Cedar Cove's shoreline had become another ritual, another way to mark time in this strange liminal space she inhabited. No longer a wife, not yet a mother, somehow both heartbroken and healing. Later, as afternoon sunlight glinted off the water, Avery picked her way carefully across the damp sand. The spring tide had left behind a treasure trove of shells and smooth stones. She bent to retrieve a piece of sea glass, its edges softened by years of tumbling in the waves, a perfect metaphor for what she hoped time would do to her own sharp edges of pain. She hadn't told Kai about the baby. Each time she'd compose the text or email, something stopped her. Pride, perhaps, or fear, or the memory of the growing distance between them in those final months. The way his eyes would slide past her when she spoke, already focused on the next meeting, the next deadline, the next city. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a heart-stopping moment she wondered if somehow her thoughts had conjured him. But it was just Pia, checking in as she did every few days. "How's my favorite mama-to-be?" her sister chirped when Avery answered. "Growing," Avery replied, settling onto a driftwood log. "The doctor says everything looks perfect so far." "And have you—" Pia's question trailed off, the unspoken name hanging between them. "No, and I'm not going to." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. "Ave, I know it's not my place, but—" "You're right, it's not your place." Avery's tone was sharper than intended. She softened it with a sigh. "Sorry, he made his choice, Pia. He chose his career over our marriage, over and over again." "People can change," her sister offered gently. Maybe, but I can't risk hoping for that again." After they hung up, Avery remained on the beach, watching gulls wheel against the darkening sky. The truth was, she still dreamed about Kai sometimes. Not the distracted, work-obsessed stranger from their final year together, but the man who once knew her better than anyone else. The one who could make her laugh until her sides ached, who remembered how she took her coffee even when he was half asleep himself. The worst part wasn't losing the man she'd married. It was mourning the future they'd planned together. The children they'd talked about having, the house by the water they'd someday buy, the growing old with hands intertwined and silver in their hair. Now she would have a child, their child, but the rest of that dream had slipped away like sand through her fingers. 800 miles south, in a glass-walled office overlooking San Francisco Bay, Kai Bennett stared blankly at his computer screen. The Singapore project, the one he had sacrificed everything for, was finally launched and running smoothly. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. "Earth to Kai," said a voice from his doorway. "The team's heading out for drinks to celebrate. You coming?" Derek Chen, his vice president of operations, leaned against the frame, eyebrows raised expectantly. "You go ahead," Kai replied, gesturing at the documents on his screen. "I need to finish reviewing these contracts." Derek sighed. "You've been back from Singapore for 2 weeks, and I don't think you've left this office before 9 once. The divorce was months ago, man. You need to start living again." Kai's jaw tightened. "I'm fine." "Sure you are," Derek shook his head. "Listen, Julia and I are having some people over for dinner Saturday. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation with actual human beings. You should come." Before Kai could formulate another excuse, Derek added, "And I won't take no for an answer. 6 o'clock. Bring wine." Alone again, Kai loosened his tie and swiveled his chair to face the window. Twilight was settling over the bay, lights beginning to shimmer on the water. It reminded him of the view from his and Avery's condo in Seattle, the one that he'd sold 3 weeks after the divorce was final, unable to bear the emptiness that echoed through its rooms. He hadn't expected it to hurt this much. The separation had been mutual, after all. They'd grown apart, become strangers sharing a home but little else. The divorce had simply formalized what was already broken. So why did he still reach for her in the middle of the night? Why did he still catch himself picking up his phone to tell her about something funny or interesting, only to remember she wasn't his to call anymore? Saturday evening found Kai on the Chen's doorstep, wine in hand and social smile firmly in place. Julia Chen greeted him with a warm hug that momentarily caught him off guard. Physical contact had become rare in his life. "She's so glad you could make it," she said, ushering him inside. "There's someone I want you to meet, an old college friend who just moved here, from Seattle." Kai's heart jolted uncomfortably. Seattle. He had been avoiding even thinking about the city. The gathering was small and casual. Derek and Julia, a couple he recognized from his firm's legal department, and a petite woman with a pixie cut who Julia introduced as Mira. "Seattle, huh?" Kai asked politely as they were seated for dinner. "Job opportunity," Mira replied. "I'm a pediatric nurse, though I miss my friends I left behind." She took a sip of her wine. "Actually, I think you might know one of them, Avery Morales. She mentioned her ex worked in tech." Kai's fork clattered against his plate. "You know Avery?" "We volunteered at the same art therapy program for kids," Mira explained, seemingly oblivious to his reaction. "Such a talented artist. I was sad to see her move away, especially in her condition, though I understand wanting family support at a time like that." The conversation continued around him, but he heard nothing beyond the roaring in his ears. Condition? Family support? When Mira excused herself to the restroom, he followed, catching her in the hallway. "What did you mean about Avery's condition?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Her eyes widened. "Oh, God, you didn't know." Her hand flew to her mouth. "I assumed since you were married—" "Didn't know what?" Each word felt like it was being dragged from his throat. "She's pregnant," Mira said softly. "About 4 months along now, I think." 4 months. Simple math told him everything he needed to know. The child was his, and Avery hadn't told him. 30 minutes later, he was back in his apartment, travel sites open on his laptop, the dinner abandoned with a hastily manufactured emergency. By morning, he had a flight booked to Seattle and a rental car reserved to drive to Cedar Cove, the small coastal town Avery had once mentioned her aunt lived in. As the plane took off the following evening, Kai gripped the armrests, his mind spinning with questions and accusations. Why had she kept this from him? Did she think he wouldn't care? That he wouldn't want to be involved? Or worse, had she believed he wouldn't be a good father? That thought cut deepest of all, because a voice in the back of his mind whispered that she might be right. He had failed at being a husband, after all. Who was to say he wouldn't fail at fatherhood, too?
The morning after the storm dawned impossibly clear, as if the tempest had scrubbed the very air clean. Avery woke to the sound of hammering and found Kai on a ladder against the greenhouse, already at work replacing broken panes. "You're still here," she observed, handing him a mug of coffee. He accepted it with a nod. "I told Marina I'd fix what I could before heading back. The rental car's not due back until tomorrow anyway." The practical explanation didn't quite mask the uncertainty in his eyes. The question of what happened now, after last night's emotional breakthrough, but before any real decisions had been made. Marina emerged from the house, her head bandaged, but her spirit undimmed. "I made breakfast," she announced, "and I won't take no for an answer from either of you." Over plates of scrambled eggs and toast, they navigated the awkward morning after of their confrontation. Kai explained about his job in San Francisco, the Singapore project that had finally launched, the changes he'd been making since the divorce. "I've stepped back from direct management," he said, pushing his eggs around his plate. "Delegated more, started leaving the office by 6 most days." "That doesn't sound like you," Avery commented, trying to imagine the workaholic she'd known voluntarily reducing his hours. His eyes met hers. "I didn't like who I was becoming either, Avery. After you left, it forced me to look at what I'd prioritized, what I'd lost because of it." Marina, sensing the need for privacy, made a show of remembering a phone call she needed to make and disappeared into her bedroom. "What happens now?" Avery asked when they were alone. Kai set down his fork. "I want to be involved in our daughter's life. Completely involved, not just weekends and holidays." "You live in San Francisco," she pointed out. "I'm building a life here." "I know, and I'm not asking you to uproot everything." He hesitated, then continued with careful words, "But I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be the father she deserves, the co-parent you deserve." Co-parent, not husband, not partner. The distinction was both a relief and a subtle disappointment. "I have a prenatal appointment next week," she offered. "You could come if you want, see the ultrasound." His smile was immediate and genuine. "I'd like that very much." That appointment became the first tentative step in their new, undefined relationship. Kai rearranged meetings to be there, arriving with a notebook full of questions he'd researched and a nervousness Avery found endearing despite herself. Watching his face as the technician pointed out their daughter's features on the screen, the curve of her spine, the perfect tiny hands, the strong heartbeat, Avery glimpsed the man she'd fallen in love with years ago. Focused, present, fully engaged in the moment rather than mentally elsewhere. "She's beautiful," he whispered, eyes suspiciously bright. "She looks like an alien potato," Avery replied with a laugh, then froze as she realized it was the first time she had genuinely laughed in his presence in over a year. He caught it too, his expression softening into something dangerously close to tenderness. "Maybe, but she's our alien potato." After the appointment, they fell into a pattern that defied easy definition. Kai extended his stay, working remotely from a rented cottage down the beach. He attended every appointment, helped finish repairs on Marina's greenhouse, and began accompanying Avery on her daily walks. They talked more during those weeks than they had in the final year of their marriage. About what had gone wrong, yes, but also about their fears and hopes for parenthood, about the dreams they'd once shared and the separate paths they'd found themselves on. "I always pictured us raising children near the water," Kai admitted as they walked along the shore one evening, the setting sun painting everything in shades of amber and rose. "Why didn't you tell me?" Avery asked, bending to retrieve a perfect sand dollar. He was quiet for a moment. "I thought we had time. That's the thing I regret most, acting like our future was guaranteed, like I could postpone the present." The honesty between them was new and fragile, but it felt like the foundation of something that might actually last. Then, 6 weeks after Kai's arrival in Cedar Cove, everything changed again. Avery woke in the middle of the night to a sharp, cramping pain and the horrifying realization that her sheets were damp with blood. Her panicked call brought Kai running from his cottage, just as Marina was helping her to the car. "It's too early," Avery kept saying, fear making her voice high and thin. "She's not ready." The hour-long drive to the hospital was a blur of pain and terror. Kai held her hand the entire way, his face pale, but his voice steady as he promised over and over that everything would be okay. In the emergency room, doctors moved with controlled urgency, their expressions grave as they examined her and checked the baby's heartbeat. "Placental abruption," the obstetrician explained. "The placenta has partially separated from the uterine wall. We need to monitor you both very closely. If it worsens, we may need to deliver immediately." "But she's only 30 weeks, Kai said, the research he had done evident in his immediate understanding of what that meant. "Her lungs!" "We'll do everything we can," the doctor assured them. "Right now we're going to try to stabilize the situation." Avery was admitted to the high-risk unit, surrounded by machines monitoring her and the baby. Kai refused to leave her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, advocating fiercely when shifts changed and new doctors needed to be brought up to speed. 3 days of this limbo passed, Avery confined to bed, the baby's heartbeat a constant electronic reassurance, Kai becoming increasingly haggard but unfailingly present. On the 4th morning, as dawn painted the hospital room in pale light, Avery reached for his hand where it lay on the edge of her bed. "You need to sleep," she told him, "in a real bed." "I'm fine," he insisted, though the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. "You're not, and if things take a turn, I need you functional, not sleep-deprived and emotional." He studied her face for a long moment. "I'm not leaving you alone. Marina will be here in an hour. Just go to the hotel, shower, sleep for a few hours, please." Finally, reluctantly, he agreed. But before leaving, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, the gesture so achingly familiar that brought tears to her eyes. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. Alone, with only the steady beep of monitors for company, Avery allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing increasingly clear during this crisis. Kai had changed. Or perhaps he had simply returned to the man he truly was, before ambition and work had pulled him away. Either way, the man who had barely noticed when she'd had the flu during their marriage was now anticipating her needs before she expressed them, remembering her preferences for ice chips and room temperature, advocating with doctors, and researching every aspect of their situation. He returned 5 hours later, freshly showered and marginally less exhausted, to find Avery's room filled with activity. Her doctor was there, along with a neonatal specialist and several nurses. "What's happening?" he asked, fear sharpening his voice as he moved immediately to Avery's side. "Her condition is stabilized," the doctor explained. "The bleeding is stopped, and the latest scans show no further separation. If this continues, we might avoid early delivery." "But she's only 30 weeks, Kai said, his research he had done evident in his immediate understanding of what that meant. "Her lungs—" "We'll do everything we can," the doctor assured them. "Right now we're going to try to stabilize the situation. But," he continued, "she'll need to remain on bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy, possibly here, possibly at home with very strict limitations and frequent monitoring." "Whatever it takes," Kai said immediately. Later, when they were alone again, Avery looked at him curiously. "You have a company to run, a life in San Francisco. You can't stay here indefinitely." "Watch me," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Kai!" "No," he cut her off gently but firmly. "This isn't negotiable, Avery. Whatever arrangement we figure out for the future, right now, in this moment, you and our daughter are my only priority. Everything else can wait." The declaration hung between them, sincere and weighty. "What about after?" she asked quietly. "When she's born, when I'm recovered, you'll go back to your life and we'll go back to ours, and then what?" Kai was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I do know I don't want to miss anything else. Not her first smile, not her first steps, not her first anything. And he hesitated, then continued with careful honesty, "I don't want to miss you either." The monitors beeped steadily in the background as they gazed at each other, the admission changing the air between them into something charged with possibility. "I'm not ready to make promises," Avery said softly, "but I'm open to seeing where this goes." Kai nodded, understanding the gift she was offering, not forgiveness exactly, but the chance to earn it, to build something new from the lessons of what had broken before. "One day at a time," he suggested, echoing Marina's wisdom from months ago. "One breath at a time," Avery corrected, with a small smile. Outside the hospital window, the tide was coming in, waves rebuilding what the last storm had washed away, slowly, patiently, with natural persistence. Nature understood what humans often forgot.